The Texas sun had barely started to dip behind the jagged hills, leaving a warm amber glow over the wide-open ranch. Dust floated lazily in the air, caught in the last rays of daylight. A soft breeze rustled the tall prairie grass, carrying the faint smell of leather, hay, and smoke from a distant cook fire. On the edge of the corral she stood, gripping the wooden rail, knuckles white, her chest heaving like she was trying to hold back a storm inside her. I can't hold back, she whispered, voice trembling but fierce, almost daring him to challenge her. The rancher froze mid-step, his hands still coated in sawdust and sweat from repairing the broken fence earlier that afternoon. He had been working the land since sunrise, rope in hand, boots caked with red dust, and yet her words cut through everything else like a shot of cold water. His eyes, shadowed and deep, locked on hers. There was a tension in the air thicker than the summer heater current neither of them could deny. He approached slowly, boots crunching against the dry soil, each step measured, deliberate. He could smell the faint hint of sweat, the mingling of sun-warmed skin and hay dust, and it pulled him forward even as his mind screamed caution. There was history here, unspoken yet heavy, between the lines of what they had allowed themselves before the evening sky began to bleed into darker tones. You shouldn't, he started, voice low, almost lost in the wind, but she cut him off with a sharp look. Her green eyes were blazing now, a mixture of fear and desire, a contradiction he had seen before but never so raw, so exposed. The way she stood there, framed by the fading sunlight, made his chest tighten, his hands itch to reach out, to close the space between them. The rancher's mind spun duty, reputation, reason all tangled into one knot of restraint, and yet every instinct in him urged him to ignore all warnings, all limits. His gaze flicked to the horizon, then back to her, as if seeking an answer from the open land itself. But the prairie offered no counsel, only silence and endless space, just like their unspoken agreement. Please, she whispered again, breath-catching. I can't, not anymore. Her words were softer now but carried a weight that pressed into his chest, made him pause, made him remember all the moments that had led to this days of stolen glances, nights of silent tension, the shared labor under the unrelenting sun, the quiet confessions in the barn after the cattle were secured. The rancher's hands flexed at his sides. He could feel the heat rising from the earth through his boots, the warmth of the fading sun on his shoulders, and the tension that wrapped around them like barbed wire. He stepped closer, careful, almost reverent, but the air between them was charged with anticipation. She bit her lip, eyes darting away for a fraction of a second before returning to meet his gaze. There was fear there, yes, but also a defiance that made him pause. He had never been one to ignore rules, to cross lines, and yet the pull was irresistible. Every part of him, the muscles worn from work, the hands hardened by rope and fence, the years of solitude, was drawn to hers. You know this is dangerous, he said finally, low and rough. His voice carried the weight of experience, of someone who had seen too much, and yet never enough. But she shook her head, stepping closer despite the hesitation in her own movements. I know, she admitted, voice barely audible over the rustling grass, but I can't. Not now. The rancher's heart pounded. Every sense was heightened, the faint scent of her hair carried on the wind, the warmth of her presence, the way her hands trembled as they rested on the railing. He had to decide, right then, whether to step back into the safety of reason or forward into the unknown, into something forbidden yet irresistible. A hawk screamed overhead, circling a lone witness to the moment. He exhaled slowly, feeling the tension coiling in his chest, uncoiling only in the presence of her gaze. He could see the struggle in her eyes, the hesitation, the trust she offered without words, and it made him both cautious and reckless. He reached out, hand hovering just above hers, stopping short. The air between them seemed to vibrate with the unspoken question, do we dare? Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't step back. She let him linger, let him choose, and in that pause, time seemed to stretch. The rancher's mind raced, flashing through years of life on the ranch, the long days under the sun, the nights by the fire, the weight of responsibility and isolation. And then there was her, standing there, breaking through every rule he had ever followed, challenging him in ways he had never imagined. Finally, his hand brushed hers, tentative at first, testing, then firmer as she leaned slightly into the contact. Sparks of heat seemed to arc between them, a current that neither could control. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the corrals, highlighting every line of tension, every hesitation, every heartbeat. I shouldn't, he murmured, the words half plea, half warning, but she shook her head, lips parting, breath shaky. I can't wait, she said, urgency trembling in every syllable. The simple honesty of it, the raw need, made him falter and yet step closer, drawn by forces older than reason, wilder than the land around them. His other hand moved slowly, almost reverently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The contact was electric, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to nothing but the two of them, the fading light, the whispering wind, and the shared heat of anticipation. Then he whispered, voice low, carrying the weight of his restraint and the pull of temptation, we do it. Carefully, she nodded, eyes bright, lips trembling. I trust you, she said, and in that moment, trust was all that mattered, stronger than fear, stronger than rules, stronger than rules, stronger than the caution that had held him for so long. The rancher swallowed hard, taking a slow step forward, bridging the distance. The corral around them, the cattle milling in the dust, the vast open sky, it all faded into a blur. His hands found her shoulders, steadying her, feeling the slight tremble beneath her clothes, the heartbeat racing against his own. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to ignore the boundaries, to let desire guide him instead of caution. The prairie around them held its breath, the wind still, the dust settled, only the quiet, intense moment remained, drawing them together, taut with anticipation and unspoken promises. She leaned slightly into him, a mixture of fear and courage etched across her face. "Don't stop," she murmured, voice almost lost in the fading light, and he felt it, the pull, the necessity, the undeniable truth of the moment. He hesitated only briefly, looking down at her, seeing the trust, the defiance, the longing in her eyes. Then he made the choice, and in that choice, the world seemed to tilt, the prairie seemed to lean in closer, and the sun dipped behind the hills as if the land itself bore witness to what was about to unfold. Every muscle in his body was tense, every nerve alive, every thought focused on the single truth. She had crossed a line first, daring him to respond, daring him to act, daring him to break the rules that had governed his life for so long. The first contact was slow, careful, tentative, testing the boundaries of trust and desire. Her body stiffened initially, then relaxed as she allowed herself to lean closer, matching the rhythm, the unspoken understanding building between them. The corral, the cattle, the distant hills, they all faded into insignificance. Time itself seemed to pause, stretching out in long deliberate moments as they navigated the fragile line between restraint and abandon. Every glance, every brush of skin against skin, spoke louder than words could ever capture, and in that suspended space, the rancher realized something he hadn't admitted before. Desire, once awakened, could not be tamed by rules, by caution, or by fear, only by trust, by surrender, by the fragile, powerful connection of two people daring to cross the lines they once thought inviolable. The wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying the soft, tremulous words she had spoken. "I can't hold back." And in that whisper he found permission, understanding, and a strange, liberating courage. The choice had been hers, and now it was his to honor, to act upon, to navigate the uncharted territory of desire and trust. The evening shadows deepened over the ranch, stretching long and dark across the dusty corral. The air had cooled slightly, but the tension between them was still palpable, almost suffocating in its intensity. Every movement was deliberate, every breath measured, every glance loaded with unspoken meaning. She could feel it, the pull of his presence, the weight of his restraint slowly crumbling. He stepped closer, boots crunching softly against the dry dirt, and she instinctively leaned forward, drawn to him despite the caution screaming inside her. "Are you sure?" he murmured, voice low, threaded with a mixture of worry and desire. Her fingers grazed his hand, brushing against the calluses worn from years of labor. "I've never been more certain," she whispered, eyes locked on his. There was no hesitation in her tone, only a raw honesty that made his chest tighten and his mind falter. The rancher's hands hovered near her shoulders for a moment, then slowly moved, tentative but confident, tracing the line of her arms. Her skin felt warm beneath his touch, electric in its softness. She shivered slightly, but did not pull away. Instead, she pressed closer, letting him feel the surrender in her body, the trust she placed in his control. They moved together like a carefully choreographed dance, yet one without rehearsal, guided only by instinct and the unspoken connection that had built between them over countless days and stolen moments. The prairie wind whispered through the corral, rustling hay and dry grass, a natural witness to the tension and anticipation crackling between them. "I shouldn't," he muttered again, the words barely audible, almost swallowed by the dusk. Yet his hands continued to move, tracing gentle, deliberate patterns along her arms, exploring, testing, learning. Every touch sent shivers racing along her spine, her heart pounding in her chest like a drumbeat, marking the rhythm of their connection. Her breath hitched as she leaned into him, daring him to cross the invisible line, daring him to act. "Don't stop," she whispered, barely audible over the distant lowing of the cattle and the soft rustle of wind through the corral. There was courage in her voice now, tinged with a vulnerability that pulled at him more strongly than any plea or command ever could. He paused, just for a fraction of a second, and the hesitation spoke volumes. There was a struggle inside him, a battle between reason and instinct, duty and desire. Yet, when he looked into her eyes, saw the mixture of fear and longing, the sharp clarity of someone who knew exactly what they wanted, the last vestiges of restraint fell away. Slowly, deliberately, he closed the distance, hand brushing against the side of her face, tilting her head toward him. She inhaled sharply at the contact, the warmth of his palm against her skin, the slow, deliberate movement that spoke of both restraint and inevitability. The world around them seemed to fall away. Catal murmured in the distance. The wind whispered through the grass, but the rancher and she existed in a bubble of tense anticipation, each heartbeat amplified, each breath synchronized to the other. Every glance, every subtle movement, became a conversation of its own, unspoken yet understood completely between them. Her fingers tangled in his shirt, pulling him slightly closer, testing the boundaries he had set. "Please," she breathed, lips parted, eyes bright and shimmering with unrestrained emotion. The simple word held the weight of every unspoken feeling between them, every stolen glance, every shared moment that had led them here. He exhaled slowly, hand moving to rest lightly on her waist, grounding them both even as desire surged between them like wildfire. "All right," he whispered, a single word that carried both warning and surrender, a promise and a threat all at once. Her heart raced as she leaned further into him, feeling the heat of his body against hers. The strength and assurance that only someone who had spent a lifetime mastering both the land and himself could provide. And yet there was tenderness to a careful attention to her reactions, a mindfulness that made her feel both safe and exposed all at once. The rancher's lips brushed against her forehead, a feather-light touch, and she tilted her head up, searching for his eyes, for permission, for reassurance. His gaze softened, the shadows of hesitation and internal struggle flickering across his features before being replaced by a quiet determination. I'm yours," she whispered again, words almost lost in the whispering wind. There was no fear in them now, only certainty, a complete surrender to the moment, to him, to whatever lay ahead. He responded with a slow, deliberate motion, hands resting gently on her shoulders, then tracing downward, following the curve of her back, memorizing the contours of her form with the care of someone mapping a new, uncharted land. Her body leaned into his, instinctively matching the rhythm he set, a silent dialogue of trust and desire unfolding in every touch. The sun dipped lower behind the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of amber, rose, and gold. The light seemed to elongate the shadows, stretching the corral into a world apart, a stage for the quiet intensity of their connection. Each movement, each breath, each subtle shift in posture became magnified in the growing darkness, a testament to the power of the moment they shared. Her lips brushed against his jaw, a fleeting contact charged with anticipation. He tilted his head, allowing her the smallest concession of intimacy, the tiniest breach in the wall he had built around himself. And in that moment, a spark ignited, one that neither of them could ignore or contain. The prairie seemed to hold its breath, the cattle silent witnesses in the distance, the wind stilled to a gentle murmur. All that existed was the rancher and her, two people suspended on the edge of choice, desire, and the fragile line between restraint and surrender. Her fingers traced the lines of his shirt, lingering over the muscles he had honed through years of work, each contact a question, a dare, an invitation. "Please don't stop," she murmured again, her voice trembling with the force of everything she had held back, the emotions she had kept buried beneath layers of caution and propriety. The rancher's hand moved slowly, resting lightly at her waist, then gliding upward to trace the curve of her back. Every motion was deliberate, testing, guiding, learning, and responding. The electricity between them crackled, small sparks in the cooling evening air, charged with the intensity of anticipation and desire that had been building for months, years even. He paused, forehead resting against hers, breathing in the scent of her hair, the warmth of her skin, the undeniable draw that had pulled him closer despite every rule he had sworn to follow. Her hands rested lightly on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, matching it to her own. "Are you certain?" he asked, voice low, thick with emotion and hesitation. "I've never been more certain in my life," she replied, eyes locked on his unwavering, fearless in the truth of her confession. The rancher's resolve wavered, then strengthened, and he realized that the line they were about to cross was not merely a breach of caution but a surrender to something far deeper, far more powerful. His hands moved with precision now, guided by both desire and care, exploring the fragile balance of trust she offered. Every shiver she let slip under his touch was a message, every inhale a signal, and he responded, attuned and deliberate, every motion a careful negotiation of the space between restraint and abandon. The evening deepened further into night, the sky now a deep navy, stars beginning to pierce the darkness like tiny points of witness. The rancher and she moved together in silence, communicating only through the language of touch, breath, and heartbeat. Time seemed irrelevant compared to the intensity of the connection, the inevitability of the moment. She let her head fall slightly against his chest, feeling the warmth and strength that radiated from him, feeling the fragile trust and shared desire intertwine. "I'm yours," she breathed, again, this time a soft mantra that seemed to steady them both, tethering their emotions to a single, undeniable truth. He responded with a slow, deliberate motion, drawing her closer, allowing her to feel the full weight of his presence, the security in his control, the passion that simmered beneath the surface. They existed in a suspended world, a space carved out from reality, defined only by the electricity between them, the fragile tension of trust, and the inevitable surrender that lay ahead. And as the prairie night settled in around them, cool and still, the rancher realized something profound. Rules, restraint, and caution had their place, but moments like this, raw, unrestrained, forged in trust and desire, were rarer than water in a dry creek bed, precious, dangerous, and utterly, impossibly irresistible.